The dark truth behind America's most controversial fighter aircraft reveals a story of rejection, redemption, and deadly effectiveness that changed the course of World War II. What if we told you that one of the most successful American fighters of the war was actually considered a failure by its own creators? The Bell P-39 Airacobra holds the terrifying distinction of being both America's unwanted fighter and the Soviet Union's most deadly aerial weapon. This is the shocking story of how geography, desperation, and innovative tactics transformed a rejected aircraft into a legendary killer. In the late 1930s, as storm clouds gathered over Europe, the United States Army Air Corps issued specifications for a revolutionary new fighter aircraft. The year was 1937, and military aviation was advancing at a breakneck pace. Bell Aircraft Corporation, based in Buffalo, New York, responded with one of the most audacious designs ever conceived. Led by chief designer Robert Woods and engineer Arlen Poyer, the Bell team created an aircraft that would challenge every conventional wisdom about fighter design. But you'll see why this bold innovation would later become both a blessing and a curse. The Bell P-39 Airacobra first took to the skies on April 6, 1939, at Wright Field in Ohio. This maiden flight marked the beginning of what would become one of the most controversial aircraft programs in aviation history. The prototype, designated XCUI-P-39, immediately demonstrated capabilities that both impressed and concerned military observers. However, the aircraft's most significant trials lay ahead, and the decisions made during its development would determine whether it became a triumph or a disaster. The Airacobra's design was revolutionary in ways that terrified traditional aircraft engineers. Unlike conventional fighters of the era, the P-39 featured a mid-mounted Allison V 1710 engine positioned directly behind the pilot's seat. This unprecedented configuration required an extended drive shaft that ran beneath the pilot, connecting the engine to the propeller through a complex gearing system. The engineering challenges were immense, but the benefits were equally dramatic. This unique layout allowed Bell's designers to install a devastating 37mm cannon that fired directly through the propeller hub, creating a weapon system of unprecedented power. The aircraft's tricycle landing gear represented another groundbreaking innovation. In an era when virtually all fighters used conventional tailwheel configurations, the P-39's nosewheel arrangement was revolutionary. This design provided superior ground handling characteristics and eliminated the dangerous ground loops that plagued many contemporary fighters. The cockpit featured another unusual element, a side entry door that opened like an automobile, rather than the traditional sliding canopy. These innovations made the Airacobra one of the most advanced fighters of its time, but they also created unexpected challenges. By December 7, 1941, when Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor, nearly 600 P-39 Airacobras had been manufactured. The aircraft was officially one of America's first-line pursuit planes, ready to defend the nation against enemy attack. However, the Airacobra's combat debut would reveal a deadly flaw that would haunt the aircraft throughout its service with American forces. The removal of the turbo supercharger during development had catastrophically compromised the aircraft's high-altitude performance, reducing its maximum speed from 390 miles per hour to just 368 miles per hour at higher altitudes. This seemingly minor modification would prove to be a fatal decision. American and British air forces expected their fighters to engage enemy aircraft at altitudes exceeding 20,000 feet, where strategic bombers and high-altitude fighters operated. The P-39's performance above 17,000 feet was so poor that it became virtually useless in the high-altitude combat scenarios that dominated European and Pacific theaters. British pilots, after testing the aircraft against their own Spitfires and Hurricanes, as well as a captured Messerschmitt Bf-109E, largely rejected the Airacobra as unsuitable for combat over Western Europe. But while America and Britain dismissed the P-39 as a failure, events unfolding on the other side of the world would transform this rejected fighter into a legendary weapon. On March 11, 1941, the American Congress adopted the Lend-Lease Act, a revolutionary program that would ultimately deliver over $50 billion worth of military equipment to Allied nations. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's vision of America as the arsenal of democracy would soon make the P-39 Airacobra one of the most significant aircraft transfers in military history. The Lend-Lease Act represented a dramatic shift in American foreign policy. Although the United States was not yet officially at war with Germany, Roosevelt recognized that the survival of Britain and other Allied nations was vital to American security. The act allowed the United States to provide weapons, aircraft, food, and other supplies to selected allies without requiring immediate payment, as long as the president deemed these transactions beneficial to national security. This massive program would eventually encompass 4 distinct protocol periods, each addressing the evolving needs of the global conflict. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, the strategic situation changed dramatically. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill immediately promised assistance to the Soviet Union, and a British credit line was opened on August 16, 1941. Arms deliveries from England began immediately, following American Lend-Lease principles. The first U.S.-Soviet Lend-Lease protocol was signed in Moscow on October 1, 1941, formally extending the program to include the Soviet Union. The timing could not have been more critical. Soviet forces were reeling under the massive German assault, losing thousands of aircraft in the opening weeks of the invasion. Desperate for any fighters that could stem the tide of the German advance, Soviet officials were far less concerned about high-altitude performance than their Western counterparts. The vast expanses of the Eastern Front, stretching across European Russia's 1.5 million square miles, created combat conditions that were radically different from the compact battlefields of Western Europe. The first Bell P-39 Airacobras arrived in northern Soviet ports in late December 1941 or early January 1942. These early aircraft, shipped from Great Britain after British rejection, featured the smaller 20mm Hispano-Suiza cannon, 4 Browning .303 caliber machine guns, and 2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns. Soviet pilots, facing the most desperate military situation in their nation's history, quickly embraced these limited numbers of early model aircraft. The geography of the Eastern Front proved to be the key factor that transformed the P-39 from failure to success. Unlike Western Europe, where compact nations like France covered only 250,000 square miles, the Eastern Front encompassed vast rural areas, spread-out cities, and underdeveloped terrain that favored low-altitude operations. Most air combat over the Russian front occurred below 20,000 feet, precisely the altitude range where the Airacobra excelled. The aircraft's powerful cannon and machine gun armament made it devastatingly effective against ground targets, while its maneuverability at low altitudes allowed it to outfight German aircraft in close combat. Soviet pilots developed innovative tactics that maximized the P-39's strengths while minimizing its weaknesses. One of the most successful Soviet aces, Alexander Pokryshkin, pioneered techniques that would become standard throughout the Soviet Air Force. Pokryshkin strongly advocated attacking and destroying the lead bomber in each approaching German formation, either through high-speed dives from above or in deadly head-on attacks. This tactic, which he called eagle strikes, created confusion among enemy formations and often caused them to flee in panic, randomly dropping their bombs in the process. Pokryshkin also developed a technique whereby Airacobra pilots would fly at high speed into combat zones slightly above their specified mission altitude, then slowly decrease altitude to gain momentum before climbing back up and repeating the procedure. This allowed the P-39 to pounce on enemy aircraft from above with devastating effect. The aircraft's unique design characteristics, including its tricycle landing gear and side entry door, proved advantageous in the harsh conditions of the Eastern Front, where rough airfields and quick turnarounds were common. The effectiveness of Soviet P-39 operations is demonstrated by the remarkable success of individual pilots. Grigory Rechkalov, flying the Airacobra, shot down 57 German aircraft, making him one of the highest-scoring aces of the war. His squadron mate, Alexander Pokryshkin, achieved 59 total victories, 47 of which were scored while flying the P-39. These numbers represent some of the highest kill ratios achieved by any fighter aircraft in any conflict, demonstrating the deadly effectiveness of the Airacobra in the right hands and under the right conditions. The Soviet appreciation for the P-39 extended beyond individual pilot success. The aircraft's sturdy construction proved ideal for the harsh operating conditions of the Eastern Front. Unlike the delicate high-altitude fighters favored by Western air forces, the Airacobra could operate from rough, unprepared airfields and withstand the punishment of low-altitude combat operations. Soviet ground crews found the aircraft relatively easy to maintain, and its powerful armament made it equally effective against both aerial and ground targets. The delivery of P-39 aircraft to the Soviet Union represented one of the most challenging logistics operations of the war. The Alaska-Siberia route, known as Al-Sibi, required aircraft to be flown from Bell Aircraft's factory in Wheatfield, New York, to Great Falls, Montana. From there, American pilots, often including female aviators from the Women Air Force Service Pilots Program, would fly the aircraft to either Fairbanks or Nome in Alaska. Soviet pilots would then take control of the aircraft and fly them across the treacherous Bering Sea to Krasnoyarsk, a journey of 3,498 miles through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. This delivery route was fraught with danger. The vast, barren seascape between Alaska and Siberia claimed numerous aircraft and pilots. Weather conditions were often severe, with low clouds, mist, fog, driving rain, snow, and high winds, making navigation extremely difficult. Single-seat fighters like the P-39 required navigational support from larger aircraft such as B-25 bombers or A-20 attack aircraft, which provided guidance and safety watch over their little friends during the dangerous crossing. The scale of P-39 deliveries to the Soviet Union was massive. Of the 9,584 Airacobras produced by Bell Aircraft, 4,773 were sent to the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease. This represented nearly half of all P-39 production, making it one of the largest single aircraft transfers in military history. The Soviet Union also received 2,400 P-63 King Cobras, the P-39's successor, though these arrived too late to see significant combat against Germany. The combat effectiveness of Soviet P-39 operations was enhanced by modifications made to suit local conditions. Soviet pilots often removed the wing-mounted machine guns to improve the aircraft's maneuverability, relying primarily on the devastating 37mm cannon and nose-mounted machine guns. This modification reduced weight and improved the aircraft's already excellent low-altitude performance. The powerful cannon, capable of destroying almost any aircraft with a single hit, became the Airacobra's signature weapon in Soviet service. The P-39's success in Soviet hands was not merely a matter of different operating conditions. Soviet pilots developed a deep appreciation for the aircraft's handling characteristics, firepower, and reliability. Unlike American and British pilots, who compared the Airacobra unfavorably to high-altitude fighters like the P-51 Mustang or Supermarine Spitfire, Soviet pilots evaluated the aircraft based on its effectiveness in the specific combat conditions of the Eastern Front. The aircraft's unique design features, initially viewed as problematic by Western air forces, proved advantageous in Soviet service. The mid-engine configuration, which had caused concern among American pilots, provided excellent weight distribution and allowed for the powerful nose-mounted armament. The tricycle landing gear, revolutionary for its time, made ground operations safer and more efficient on the rough airfields common throughout the Soviet Union. The side entry door, another unusual feature, allowed for quick pilot changes during the rapid turnarounds required by the intense pace of Eastern Front operations. Soviet success with the P-39 also reflected differences in pilot training and tactical doctrine. While Western air forces emphasized high-altitude interception and bomber escort missions, Soviet pilots were trained primarily for low-altitude combat and ground attack operations. The Airacobra's characteristics perfectly matched these requirements, allowing Soviet pilots to maximize the aircraft's potential in ways that American and British pilots could not. The combat record of the P-39 in Soviet service stands as one of the most remarkable success stories in aviation history. More than 20 Soviet pilots became aces while flying the Airacobra, and the aircraft is credited with more aerial victories than any other American-built fighter flown by any air force in any conflict. This extraordinary achievement demonstrates how the right aircraft, in the right hands, under the right conditions, can overcome seemingly insurmountable design limitations. The story of the Bell P-39 Airacobra serves as a powerful reminder that success in warfare often depends as much on adaptation and innovation as on raw performance. While American and British air forces rejected the aircraft as unsuitable for their needs, Soviet pilots transformed it into one of the most effective fighters of World War II. The vast expanses of the Eastern Front, the desperate nature of the Soviet military situation, and the innovative tactics developed by Soviet pilots combined to create the perfect environment for the Airacobra to excel. The legacy of the P-39 extends far beyond its combat record. The aircraft's innovative design features, including its mid-engine configuration, tricycle landing gear, and powerful armament, influenced fighter development for decades to come. The lessons learned from its development and deployment continue to inform aircraft design and military procurement decisions today. The story of America's unwanted fighter finding glory in Soviet hands remains one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of military aviation, demonstrating that sometimes the greatest successes come from the most unexpected sources. The Bell P-39 Airacobra's transformation from American reject to Soviet legend represents more than just a tale of military hardware. It illustrates the complex interplay of geography, tactics, and human ingenuity that determines success in warfare. The aircraft that was deemed unsuitable for Western combat conditions became the weapon that helped turn the tide on the Eastern Front, proving that in the deadly game of aerial combat, adaptation and innovation often matter more than raw performance specifications.